Sparta. The very name conjures images of valiant warriors, iron discipline, and unwavering resolve. Yet, behind the grand myth lies a complex and profoundly human history. Long before the rise of the famed hoplites and heroic last stands, the land destined to become Sparta held the traces of a vastly different civilization. In the southeastern Peloponnese lies Laconia, a vast, fertile valley, encircled by formidable rocky mountains and watered by the Eurotas River. As early as the 14th century BCE, a Mycenaean palace culture flourished here. Archaeological excavations have unearthed tablets inscribed with linear script, vibrant frescoes, and monumental stone structures belonging to a long-vanished world that succumbed to the Great Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE. This was followed by an age of darkness, uncertainty, and profound change. Into the resulting vacuum surged new tribes, the Dorians. Ancient chronicles depict them as descendants of the legendary Heracles, fearless conquerors who swept across the Peloponnese in powerful waves, pushing aside the remnants of Mycenaean civilization. Whether fact or a compelling legend, it was these new settlers who ultimately forged the state we know as Sparta. Unlike a singular act of foundation, Sparta emerged from the gradual amalgamation of four neighboring villages situated along the banks of the Eurotas River: Pitana, Limni, Missoa, and Cynosura. The city's location was strategically advantageous. A fertile valley, well protected by mountains, offered opportunities for agricultural development and defense against hostile neighbors. The land provided Sparta with sustenance, and sustenance, in turn, provided Sparta with strength. By the 9th century BCE, this early Spartan society began to consolidate. The Dorian conquerors established themselves as the ruling elite. The indigenous inhabitants of the region were reduced to second-class status or entirely enslaved. Some became perioikoi, personally free but deprived of political rights. Others were transformed into helots, an enslaved population tied to the land, compelled to farm and supply their produce to their Spartan masters. This brutal system allowed Spartan men to free themselves from all labor and devote themselves to a single pursuit: warfare. Steeped in the spirit of war, Sparta shaped its citizens from a young age, instilling in them resilience, unquestioning obedience, and fearlessness in battle. The agoge, Sparta's renowned harsh training system, began when boys reached the age of 7. At this tender age, they were separated from their families and placed in barracks, where they were taught the art of stealth, endurance, and survival in extreme conditions. Success in Sparta was not measured by comfort but by the ability to withstand pain without a single complaint. Young Spartans walked barefoot, wore only one tunic year-round, and were intentionally underfed. If they dared to steal food and were caught, punishment was meted out not for the theft itself, but for being apprehended. Legend tells of a boy who concealed a stolen fox beneath his tunic. Preferring to hide his transgression, he allowed the animal to gnaw at his flesh and died without uttering a sound. Regardless of the veracity of these tales, such narratives played a crucial role in forging the Spartan identity. Upon reaching adulthood, Spartan men became members of communal dining groups, known as syssitia. Here, regardless of their wealth, they ate together daily. Each participant contributed a share of produce from his land allotment, and no one was permitted to dine alone. This communal life reinforced discipline and ensured constant oversight, preventing weaknesses from going unnoticed. Spartan society was structured around a military ethos. The citizen population was small, elite, and tightly controlled. Land was divided into equal allotments, which were cultivated by helots. Manual labor and trade were considered occupations unworthy of Spartans and were left to the perioikoi and foreigners. Gold and silver coinage was forbidden. Wealth, at least in theory, played no part. The only values considered paramount were courage, obedience, and endurance. The position of women in Sparta differed radically from that in other Greek city-states. They received an education, engaged in physical exercise, and were known for their forthright character. While men were in barracks or at war, women managed the estates and were responsible for raising strong sons. They moved freely in public, wore clothing considered modest by Greek standards, and were renowned for their sharp intellect. A famous saying attributed to a Spartan mother is, "Return with your shield or on it." The Spartan state, with its strict discipline and rigid structure, pursued a primary goal, the maintenance of power. The Helots, the enslaved population, significantly outnumbered the Spartans, sometimes by a ratio of 7 to 1, creating a constant threat of rebellion. The Spartan state was, in essence, a permanent military occupation, directed not at external territories but at its own populace. Under these circumstances, unity, severity, and vigilance became vital qualities for the Spartans, as defeat in the event of a Helot uprising was unthinkable. To maintain its dominance, Sparta steadily tightened its system. The constitution, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus and supposedly conveyed through the Delphic oracle, forbade written laws, insisting on the preservation of customs through oral tradition and habit. Regardless of the historical veracity of Lycurgus's existence, his legacy exerted immense influence over the Spartans, shaping their beliefs and behavior. Sparta's system of governance represented a unique blend of monarchy, oligarchy, and elements of limited democracy. At the head of the state were two kings, representing different royal families. The Council of Elders, the Gerousia, composed of men over 60 elected for life, guided their activities. 5 ephors, elected annually by the people, wielded immense power, including the right to judge the kings. All male citizens aged 30 and above had voting rights in the popular assembly, though discussions there were kept to a minimum. This unusual political balance provided Sparta with stability, sparing it from tyranny, coups, and internal revolutions for many centuries. However, the price of this was stagnation. While the wider Greek world experienced a flourishing of trade, art, and philosophy, Sparta remained singularly focused on survival, simplicity, and military might. It is worth noting that early Sparta was not always characterized by such harshness. Before its transformation into the militarized machine celebrated in legends, it possessed a vibrant and distinctive culture. In the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, Sparta produced works of poetry, music, and fine art. Spartan pottery has been discovered as far afield as Libya and Samos. Carved ivory artifacts and ceremonial objects attest to the fact that Spartans were once deeply integrated into the wider Greek world. Poets such as Alcman composed hymns of striking beauty. Tertius, a martial poet, urged Spartans to show steadfastness in battle and die for their city. His verses, serving as moral instruction for soldiers, glorified courage as the highest human virtue, calling on warriors to stand in the front ranks. This poetry vividly demonstrates Sparta's transformation into a society where war became not merely a necessity but a sacred duty. The values of discipline, sacrifice, and silence were not just esteemed but elevated to an absolute. Over time, this rigid system, which became Sparta's hallmark, firmly established itself. The Spartan system of governance and social organization reached its peak in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, a period of active territorial expansion. A pivotal event of this era was the conquest of Mycenaean, a fertile region bordering Sparta. During the First Mycenaean War, approximately dated 743 to 724 BCE, the inhabitants of Mycenae were subjugated and reduced to helots. This meant they were stripped of their freedom and compelled to work the land, providing the Spartans with sustenance. The annexation of Mycenae allowed Sparta to significantly increase its land and labor resources, but simultaneously created a serious internal threat. The helots, deprived of rights and liberty, fiercely resisted their enslavers. In the 7th century BCE, the Second Mycenaean War erupted, which, despite Sparta's victory, demanded immense effort and sacrifice. It became clear that to maintain control over the numerous and hostile helot population, a society wholly dedicated to militarism was essential. From this point onwards, Sparta transformed, evolving from an ordinary city-state into a military camp where every aspect of life was subordinate to a single objective, the maintenance of power through force. Young men underwent continuous military training, women dedicated themselves to bearing future warriors, elders administered justice, and helots toiled ceaselessly. The entire Spartan society was under constant surveillance, ready at any moment to suppress the slightest sign of insubordination. Thus, Sparta managed to survive under the constant threat of rebellion. However, such a system, founded on violence and suppression, could not endure indefinitely.